I know it's so fun to be out with people in an environment like this where we're kind of getting past COVID, and so sorry we're starting a little bit late, but thank you so much for coming today. My name is Elizabeth Caswell. I'll be your moderator today, and I want to welcome you to this JDRF panel. We're just absolutely thrilled to be back in person. Before we get started with introductions of everybody up here, I just wanted to take a moment and recognize the fact that we have quite a few JDRF-funded researchers, University of Michigan researchers that focus on type 1 diabetes research, including Martin Myers, the director of the Caswell Diabetes Institute, and I'm not going to name everybody else because I'll miss some people, but if you can just take a moment and stand if you're involved with the type 1 research space. So thank you so much for being here. I do want to let you know we are going to be recording. Some of our friends and community members couldn't be here today, so we'll record this so that we can share it with them later. So most of you probably know that the JDRF mission is improving lives today and tomorrow by accelerating life-changing breakthroughs to cure, prevent, and treat type 1 diabetes and its complications. I just want to take a moment as we get started to thank all of you. We absolutely would not be here if it weren't for volunteers, fundraisers, donors, and community members without you who help us accelerate and propel the mission forward. So thank you very much for being here today, and thank you so much for your support. You probably all saw the bios for our esteemed panel, and so I'm going to start, instead of introducing them formally with all of their scientific and clinical credentials, by introducing them in the form of a question. And I wanted to ask each of our panelists, and I'll give you their names as I ask this question of them, why are you here? Why does this matter to you as a scientist or clinician or as a person caring for people with T1D? What's your why? So I'll start. I'm here because I have a husband and 2 of my 3 sons with type 1 diabetes. I became a volunteer and a donor because I thought the mission was very compelling. And I continue to be a volunteer and donor because I have never seen so much acceleration in this space as I have in the last 3 to 5 years. So I'm all in because I want a future for my children where they can say, I remember when I had T1D. And I want a future for my grandchildren where they never have to worry about living with T1D. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Sanjoy Dutta, PhD. He is the Chief Scientific Officer at JDRF, and he came in from New York to join us here in Ann Arbor. Sanjoy, what's your why?
Thank you all for coming. Good morning, everyone here. Initially, it was scientific curiosity, but then it's the mission and the passion of the organization that brought me here. There is an incredible opportunity here to fulfill our mission. I know we've been in this business for 50 years, 50 plus years now, but we are at a time when I think there are promises right now to fulfill our mission. So that's what keeps me moving every morning.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Tom Gardner. Tom is a retinopathy specialist, and he is the co-principal investigator of the JDRF Center of Excellence here at University of Michigan. Tom?
Well, good morning also. We're all here for the same reason. We all have somebody, we all have diabetes, my 2 brothers. And as an ophthalmologist, I had the privilege of taking care of many people with diabetes, and this is just a fantastic partnership we have between all of us here at U of M and JDRF and you're part of that partnership. So that's why we're here this morning.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Tom. Dr. Scott Solomon-Poor is an endocrinologist and a scientist, basic science research in beta cell biology. He is a junior investigator. Oh, sorry, he's not. Kara's a junior investigator. He is a co-principal investigator at the JDRF Center of Excellence here at U of M, and he's the director of the Type 1 Basic Research Program at the Caswell Diabetes Institute. Scott?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you all and to do this in person. So my why is pretty simple. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1986. That irrevocably shaped the trajectory of my life. Every decision I have made has centered around my diabetes from that day, including my career. I've committed my career to trying to find a cure for diabetes and fulfill the mission that all of us want to see succeed. And I'm very, very lucky to be doing it here at Michigan with some of the best colleagues in the world, great leadership, and wonderful partners with the JDRF.
Thank you, Scott. Now, Kara Mizukami Stout, I practiced in everything. Sorry, Kara, is also an endocrinologist, and she's a junior investigator at the JDRF Center of Excellence, and she is a JDRF scholar in the Center of Excellence. Kara, what's your why?
Well, not many people know this, but I grew up in an area of Colorado where the prevalence of diabetes was very high. I'm sorry, we have some feedback going on here. So as I was saying, sorry for the technical glitch, I'm from an area of Colorado that has a very high prevalence of diabetes, and so I knew from the get-go that I was interested in endocrinology. However, when I went to undergrad, I met my husband who has had type 1 diabetes since the age of 8, and that really kind of sealed the deal for me and set me on my current pathway for both my clinical and my research goals. And I'm very lucky to be here as well.
Thank you so much, Kara. So it's obvious. Everyone on this stage is all in. They care deeply about this mission. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the JDRF research strategy. Then we're going to turn to understanding a little bit more about the specific research at the JDRF Center of Excellence here at U of M. And at the end, we should have an opportunity to share what's exciting to these folks in the research space right now. And finally, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So my first question to Sanjoy, JDRF was founded 50 years ago. That's a ton of scientific advances. I mean, JDRF helped the world understand that type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease, which we never knew early on. How does JDRF decide what areas of research to pursue, given that there's so many questions that can be answered?
Yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, and as you can imagine, with scientific advances, it has evolved over the decades. And I've been at JDRF for over 12 years now, and I've seen so many changes here. So the one area where we decide on where to invest our research in or how to develop a strategy is actually based on the science. Where is the knowledge taking us? Where is the knowledge gap? So our investment in research is driven by 3 primary pillars here. One is, where is the knowledge gap, both basic and clinical knowledge gap, and what can we do to fill that gap in knowledge? The second area, which is kind of complementary, is what is already being supported by other funders, federal funders, other private institutions, and where can we either partner with them or, again, complement what they're supporting to fill gaps. The third is, how do we invest or what do we fund in terms of research and how do we move about, is actually the only metric of success that we have is, are people with diabetes doing better? So if we support something now, how will this help a person with diabetes or at risk of developing the disease? So these are kind of the philosophical things that we take. Some are semi-quantitative and some aren't. In which we decide how to invest in and how we go about our research.
So it's a really thoughtful process that involves the knowledge of your very well trained and very expert staff, full of PhDs, experts around the world that you consult with in particular scientific areas, and then key opinion leaders in the space who also weigh in on how does JDRF fill gaps, how do they overcome barriers, And there's actually even a governance process that approves the strategy developed by the staff and with input from the key opinion leaders and experts. So the strategy is available on JDRF's website. What are the pillars of the strategy at this point? What is JDRF focused on, and what kinds of answers to, what questions are we trying to answer with our research?
Absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth, for that question. So once we have, the first layer was what I answered in the previous question here, and then how do we focus, what do we focus in the strategy per se? How do we go about our business, so to speak? That's based on primarily the disease continuum. Type 1 diabetes is a disease continuum. It's not a one episode that happened and you develop type 1 diabetes. And so there are people, when I say disease continuum, there are individuals who are at risk of developing the disease. Mostly it's silent, it's asymptomatic. And so, the risk persists in some people for a year, in some people for decades, until they develop type 1. So the investments are in identifying who is at risk of developing the disease. Can we do something to help them when they're at risk so that they are better informed when they get a diabetes diagnosis, as well as when we have preventive therapies? And then comes the stage of when you are diagnosed clinically with type 1 diabetes based on what I call a very artificial number, hemoglobin A1C. But when you're diagnosed, you're not only hit by the type 1 diabetes bomb, and most families don't know what it is ahead of time. How do you deal with the disease? Which kind of doctor do you go to? What are the therapies available? And we all know right now it's just insulin, but what are the other promising therapies available? So the research strategy also prioritizes what we call recently diagnosed type 1 diabetes, or stage 3 for those that are familiar with the diabetes. So stage 1 and 2 is when you are not diagnosed with diabetes and you're not on insulin, then you're on insulin. And then our prioritization is the 1.6 million, 1.8 million Americans, and many, many more million Americans around the world living with the disease for years, decades, and some even with some diabetic complications. And so how can we have better treatments for those people? How can we ease their burden, clinical burden, as well as psychosocial burden? And can we provide them insulin independence through therapies that we'll get into in a second, that even the Center of Excellence is focused on? Can we provide insulin independence? So our prioritization areas are, again, across the disease continuum, at-risk individuals, newly diagnosed, what we can do for them, and people that are living with the disease for years or decades, and some even with complications, and what can we do to prevent that or avert that?
So sometimes we refer to buckets of research programming. We have our cures bucket, and our cures bucket includes that screening for at-risk people. It includes disease modification of the immune system or replication of beta cells. And then it includes beta cell replacement. And then we have our improving lives bucket, and that includes everything that, Sanjoy implied, from devices to drugs to complications to the psychosocial impacts of this disease, and how can we help people do better today while we continue to progress towards cures. So Tom, I'm going to switch over to you. You've been connected to JDRF through your research for a really long time. I'm not going to give any years, but he knows I'm just teasing him. So what was your first research funded by JDRF, and how did that both affect your career and advance the field to where it is today?
Well, the first grant was about 30 years ago when I was just starting, and we had this idea that reducing the leakage of the blood vessels in the retina with antihistamine pills might reduce the swelling and improve vision. It was a small grant, all $50,000 to answer that big question, and it actually didn't work, but like in every other field, sometimes you learn more by things that don't work than things that do. And that's how it got started, and so it's been a wonderful relationship with JDRF, and it continues to be.
And across the course of your career, that was one of your early research projects, but across the course of your career, you've had many partnerships with JDRF, including one at Penn State, also in retinopathy, and now this big partnership here at the center. Scott, you also received a JDRF grant early in your career. Tell us a little bit about what that grant meant to you in your career, and what kinds of questions you were exploring.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, so to give you a little bit of background on that initial grant, I have to take you quickly, just a little bit further back to explain why we were doing that work. So some of my earliest research work was about 20 years ago in islet cell transplantation. There was a lot of enthusiasm. Many of you in the room might be aware of that, where you take islets from someone who has passed away and then transplant them into a person with type 1 diabetes, give them immunosuppressive drugs, and then hopefully get them off insulin. There was a lot of enthusiasm with it, but unfortunately, within 2 to 5 years, most people were back on insulin. They were having to take these immunosuppressive drugs. So I was very excited to be a part of that, but I also realized that that wasn't the fix. And so the funded work was around this idea that we need to know why diabetes, type 1 diabetes, occurs in order to, in a smart and effective way, cure the disease. And so this funded grant from JDRF allowed us to explore some of the genetics of type 1 diabetes. We know there's a genetic part of the disease. And in my lab, we identified there's about 60 genes that are associated with type 1 diabetes that affect many different organ systems, not just your immune system. And through this support, we were able to identify how one of these genes affects your beta cells and makes them susceptible to death in type 1 diabetes. So very important for us to get our foot in the door to understand the disease.
So Scott's being a little bit kind of modest, because that was one of JDRF's prestigious career development awards. And as you can see, we attracted Scott to this space, and he continues in this space to this day. And I just found out that Martin Meyer also had a JDRF Career Development Award and has continued his career in diabetes. And Sanjoy Dutta also had a JDRF Career Development Award, went a couple other places, and then came back to JDRF and TUND. So I think these investments in training and in research early on really help connect people to the pathway that we're trying to pursue. Sandra, I'm going to switch around now to you, because I can't repress my excitement about something that JDRF announced that I think really connects to our mission just last Thursday. And I wanted you to share with everybody in case they didn't hear about the big announcement last Thursday.
Sure. I'll answer that question with a question. A show of hands, how many people have had questions about insulin price and have and so there's the answer to that question. So what we announced last Thursday with a partnership with 13 other like-minded organizations, including other funders, philanthropists, insurance companies as well as Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kaiser Permanente, and others. I'm forgetting some of the names here. Hampshire Charitable Trust, are a private funding organization that has invested significantly in type 1 diabetes. A partnership with Civica RX, a not-for-profit, that has been in business for about 5 or 6 years, from former pharmaceutical employees, retired employees, getting together and manufacturing genericized. So these are drugs that have gone out of patent but are still very expensive, and manufacturing them and providing them to the hospital at a minimal cost, almost at cost, like not-for-profit cost, so that patients have access to medicines. Thankfully for us, there was an interest in doing this with insulin. And Civica has never manufactured insulin before. So we pounced on that opportunity, and JDRF, along with others, led the way to now announce this partnership to manufacture 3 of the most commonly prescribed insulins in the United States and probably around the world: the long-acting Glargine or Lantus, and the bolus insulins during meal, Humalog and Novolog, or Aspart and Lispro. So these, Lispro and Aspart, as I switched the order. But in any case, these will be manufactured by Civica RX and directly given into the hands of the patients, either through a pharmacy or somehow, with a neatly worked out distribution chain at $30 a vial, or $55 for a set of 5 pens. So this is a cost reduction of close to 90%. depending on where you are, which insurance you are on, 80 to 90%. So this is going to help essentially all people in the United States that are insulin dependent, type 1 and type 2. And I don't know if you know much of the stats. It's actually pretty shocking that 1 in 4 people, 25% of people in the United States, they choose between insulin and buying food. So that's devastating, right? So this will ensure that everybody has access to insulin, particularly the underinsured and the uninsured. But it is for everyone there. So this was our social, our moral responsibility, and we were very glad to have announced this just last Thursday, less than a week ago. So fingers crossed, we will have the first set of the insulins in 2024, and then the other 2 to follow suit soon.
So, I mean, I feel like my family is lucky because we have really solid insurance. But for the 25% of people who are rationing insulin, and none of us have missed the stories about people dying from lack of insulin, this is improving lives today. So I mean, I couldn't be prouder of JDRF as an organization. And I think JDRF takes these big bets. They make these big investments. And so one of the things that JDRF decided to do a few years ago was make a big investment in what we call centers of excellence. And presently, there are 3 centers of excellence in the US and 1 in Canada. So Sanjay, can you tell us a little bit about why centers of excellence, what the centers of excellence are, and why JDRF decided to invest in a center of excellence here at University of Michigan?
Sure. There are many reasons to do that. The main reason is when you're asking a very complex scientific problem, clinical or basic research problem that requires multidisciplinary expertise. No single investigator will have the wherewithal to resolve it, no matter how accomplished they are or how big their facilities are, because it requires different disciplines to come together. It could involve metabolism, immunology, basic beta cell biology, clinical practice, diabetic complications, even tools such as artificial intelligence, mapping data sets. When there is a complex scientific question to answer, JDRF puts together centers of excellence. Sometimes they're at one uni, and I'll get to that in a second because Michigan is so well equipped it could be done at one uni. In some cases, we bring other 2 or 3 places together, like in the Northern California area, we have 3 institutes, the UCSF, Stanford University, and the Gladstone Institute, working together to solve a problem, which is the question around editing immune cells to render them not destructive to beta cells. Similarly, in New England, we have the Harvard Stem Cell Institute, Jostin Diabetes Center, UMass, and a clinical research organization trying to make beta cells that are now resistant to the immune attack, complementary to the Northern California Center. And similarly, in British Columbia, Vancouver, what the University of Michigan is doing is addressing a very important scientific problem. So we know glucose is a number we are all fixated with, right? What was your value after meal? What is your A1C? We often end up defining a person by glucose. And we are very insulin-centric in our view. How many units did you take? Did you bolus properly? Did you do this? Did you do that? And that is the big problem. That is the elephant in the room. And rightfully, we have been addressing it. But in looking for the tree, we have missed the forest. In a person with type 1 diabetes, unfortunately, many metabolic pathways beyond glucose, beyond insulin, have gone awry. Many hormonal pathways. And the entire metabolic milieu is rendering itself not amenable to a healthy life. And so the University of Michigan is addressing many of these scientific problems, but the main crux, the central principle is, can we provide a metabolic balance overall, bioenergetics, metabolic balance, that not only helps with the glucose values, other metabolic parameters, complications, even psychosocial health of a person, but also provides a healthy environment so these people, when they're ready to receive, for example, what Scott is doing, a beta cell transplant, or Lonnie, who's not here in the room, but Lonnie Shea is also working on, that those beta cells have a healthy home, a healthy metabolically balanced home, they can survive in there. So the Center of Excellence at the University of Michigan was a natural choice for us to come to because of the diverse expertise that that resides within the uni.
That's a perfect segue to asking Tom, can you describe a little bit about who makes up the team and sort of why that you all came together around this?
Right. So actually, one of the unique features of Michigan is that we work together really well, and we like each other, right? At least most days. And we've actually many of us have been collaborating on related projects for years, but not in Type 1. And some of the concepts have already been somewhat established. So the opportunity to apply this to Type 1, which many of us really care about, is fantastic. So we have people from, obviously, internal medicine, which means endocrinology, nephrology, cardiology, and we have people from pediatrics, biomedical engineering, neurology, gastroenterology, ophthalmology,
science.
And so really way across the spectrum. And this brought many different departments and parts of the university together because it's a very complex problem, as Sanjoy said.
I mean, I have never seen a group of with a more interdisciplinary approach than this Center of Excellence, and it's absolutely extraordinary. And Kara, you're one of the junior scientists on this project. What's it mean to you to be involved with a project that is so respected, and how do you think it's going to advance your research opportunities? What's exciting about it for you?
I think that what excites me the most, well, there's a couple of things that excite me the most. The first is I have this opportunity to work with experts in the field, not only in endocrinology, I'm an endocrinologist, but also in ophthalmology with Dr. Gardner, and I get to learn from some of the more senior investigators, and that mentorship is really unparalleled. I think the other thing, it's been mentioned a couple of times, it's extremely unique to have such a collaborative and multidisciplinary team. I can't emphasize that enough. We tend to, as we become more specialized in medicine, work more and more in our silos. And the opportunity to collaborate with ophthalmology and nephrology is really, it's inspiring, and it's just a wonderful opportunity. There's really no words for that.
So there's a theme here that I want to just put a point on, and that is there's a very big commitment by JDRF and by the scientists that we work with to mentor and engage younger researchers so that we can retain them in this field. It's both critical for clinical needs and also critical for scientific advances. So, Kara, I'm absolutely thrilled that you and the other JDRF scholars are part of this project because you're the future of this research. So thank you so much for your commitment to this work. So Tom, Sanjoy alluded a little bit to sort of the question that the Center of Excellence is posing, but can you kind of hone in on the fundamental concept of metabotypes and what you're trying to accomplish here with the center?
Okay, so Sanjoy mentioned about what are the unknowns, what we call knowledge gaps, and the knowledge gap is what drives largely complications in the long run, but in the short term, what affects the health of beta cells. And again, the assumption is that it's glucose. But in fact, there's been evidence for many, many years that proteins and different kinds of lipids, fats, are also affected by diabetes. But those factors have really not been put into clinical practice. So, for example, the problem we all worry about the most is hypoglycemia, because we're trying to ratchet down that. But what if, in fact, glucose isn't the main driver of complications? It might be, but we don't know. But if it isn't, then maybe we treat these other parameters and let the blood sugar rise up a little bit and not worry about it. So the forward-looking concept is rather than just checking your glucose, you have a finger stick or a sensor that picks up these other molecules. And we actually treat those, and then the risk of hypoglycemia for those who are still taking insulin goes away. So, for example, Dr. Ford and Dr. El Ghazi have found some really amazing changes in some lipids in diabetes that appear to predict retinopathy at least in type 2 diabetes. But other similar findings have shown up in type 1. And so we're optimistic. And we also think that for the health of the beta cells, for them to do their work, the environment they're in has to be good. So that's sort of it in a nutshell. But also, and then the psychosocial part may be driven as much by proteins or something as it is by glucose.
Yeah, so body chemistry is more than just glucose.
Yeah.
And you're trying to understand how all of these inputs into the body chemistry or the metabolic environment are impacting the entire health outcome for people with T1D, which is incredible. So Scott, your project, we call him Project One, that Scott's working on in partnership with Lonnie Shea. By the way, he's a biomedical engineer. So going back to that interdisciplinary approach, is in beta cell health and beta cell metabolics. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to discover and what the ramifications of your research are?
Yeah, thank you so much. I obviously picked Project One as my project, right? Because I'm kidding.
You're number one.
Right, exactly. No, that's a joke. But you know, before I tell you more about what we're trying to do, I want to highlight that you know, what we're trying to do in trying to engineer better functioning beta cells is not doable without the critical mass at U of M that's supported by the center. So Sanjoy talked about bringing teams together. It's really unique, and I think sometimes we all don't know it who live in this community, just a powerhouse of diabetes expertise that we just have here. And I'm a native Midwesterner, and I didn't even realize this when I moved back to the Midwest, what we have at our disposal. So to kind of bring this like superstar group together is the only way that we can make real effective treatments for people with diabetes. So what Lonnie and I are trying to do together is to try to build on some exciting work in terms of making stem cells into beta cells. You know, where the field is right now, the stem cells can be turned into cells that make insulin, but those cells are relatively crummy. They don't really make a lot of insulin. When blood sugars go up, they don't really effectively respond. And that's because the internal wiring of these beta cells are not effective. The other thing we know is that when you put beta cells into a person, they're subjected to a really stressful environment. So the work that Lonnie and I have been doing is to try to work on reprogramming these beta cells and thinking about this metabotype concept. How are fats, proteins, glucose, how are they handled? How are they processed? And then how can they signal to the cell, hey, you should be releasing insulin now, because we know there are elements of these cells that aren't quite firing properly. And so that's the principal goal of what we're doing. We've been able to target a few pathways, and now we're trying to work towards screening different drugs that maybe can make those cells work more effectively, not only in the dish, but then after we put them in, hopefully one day, into a patient.
And I get that question a lot, like if we're gonna transplant beta cells, how long will they live? And I think you're talking about creating a healthy environment to create longer living cells that can help people longer and impact their need for insulin, hypoglycemia, hyperglycemia, et cetera. So,
I mean, we learned from the islet transplantation experience that the cells, that even normal, healthy beta cells from a donor don't make it very long. So if we're gonna put lousy cells in, we're probably not gonna expect a good outcome. So I think, you know, these things are having us think long term to make cells that can make it for the long haul.
So the ultimate multiple generations of cells, as we learn, we're just going to get better, stronger, faster, so to speak. So, Kara, you're involved with Project 4. And And Project 4 is touching on the complication of mental health and T1D. For those of you who don't know, JDRF is deeply committed to mental health and psychosocial impacts on T1D, and it is an area of research in our Improving Lives portfolio that we've really started emphasizing in the last 3 to 5 years. So I find it super exciting that this is a piece of the Center of Excellence. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to explore?
Sure. I think I described it as kind of like the elephant in the room. There's a lot of mental health burden with diabetes, and it really hasn't been well characterized. And that's what we're trying to do, is really look at the interplay between psychological functioning, psychological states, mental health disorders, and how does this impact and how is it affected by different glycemic factors and metabolic factors. And we're using a couple of different approaches to do this. On a very large scale, we're looking at a large database of almost 200,000 individuals with type 1 diabetes to see how common are these disorders, what factors are leading to the disorders, and what's the burden really for our individuals with type 1 diabetes in this country. And then on the other hand, we're looking at a very introspective view of an individual and what does their day with type 1 diabetes look like, and how does that impact their glycemic control, how does that impact their metabolic factors. And so we're kind of doing two complementary, like large-scale overview and then introspective approaches to get a really broad picture of how is mental health, how does that interplay with type 1 diabetes.
And I think with your more introspective piece, you're using cell phones to do episodic questions for folks with type 1, right?
Yes.
So they'll get a question during the day, and then you can look back and sort of see whether there's any glycemic or metabolic factors that maybe are tying into, like they're having the blues or having distress or having anxiety.
Absolutely. So we're having our very nice individuals with type 1 diabetes, our participants, help us with this. And they're wearing a CGM for 2 weeks, and then throughout that CGM time period, they're also answering questions that are prompted via their cell phone. So it's really looking at what does their day look like when they're not interfacing with medicine, with clinics, when they're at home and living their lives. That's what we want.
I think that has the potential to profoundly impact people's lives with T1D and the quality of their lives and their disease burden. So Tom, one of the projects that is in the Center of Excellence involves something completely different than labs and petri dishes and such. It's machine learning and artificial intelligence. Can you tell us a little bit about the project that you're hoping to impact artificial pancreas systems with what you learn?
Sure. Well, this is just a great example of the wide diversity of expertise we have here and how different people get put together. So, as you all know, the ability of CGMs and pumps to talk to each other and accurately predict the amount of insulin that's needed for somebody's activity and their diet and their stress level and everything is good, but it's not perfect. And so we have in this project, Dr. Radhika Papusi is one of our outstanding endocrinologists who takes care of a lot of patients, has paired up with Dr. Jenna Weens, who's a brilliant computer scientist, and Dr. Lynn Ang, who's also another endocrinologist, and also Kara. And they are using a form of artificial intelligence called reinforcement learning. I'm still learning that, but it's a way of teaching the computer to learn better. And they have, just in a very short time, by collecting pump data, glucose data from thousands of patients within the U of M health system to predict what the blood sugars are going to be. And they actually won an international competition recently as the best device, the best approach out there to do this. So this is, in other words, this is better than Medtronic or any of the other companies are already producing. So it's really fascinating, and they're going to work with make this an open source software and ability, so that hopefully the companies can take it up and use it and make it safer for people, improve their quality of life.
And so I think some of this approach is about personalized medicine and an algorithm that learns about an individual.
Right.
And Kara, Project 3 is also driving towards more personalized medicine. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and what you think the implications are of the research?
Sure. So I think we all have alluded to this earlier, is that glucose clearly is not the only story in type 1 diabetes, and there's other factors at play. And this has been known for a while now. Several of our researchers here at University of Michigan have played a pivotal role in determining that cholesterol pathways, blood pressure pathways, et cetera, are important. And I think what Project 3 will help us to determine is what is that metabolic fingerprint really for that individual, and how do we make that a healthier fingerprint, right? And so, and not just doing it with a one-size-fits-all approach for targeting a certain A1C or targeting a certain cholesterol level, but also just, how do we make this personal for you? So I really do think that Project 3 is kind of the forefront of personalized medicine for type 1 diabetes going forward.
And that is extraordinarily exciting to me, in terms of advances that care will be focused on each person and what their metabolic environment needs to help them live a better life. So we've touched on all 4 of the projects, and you can hear that they're very, very different in their nature. Sanjay, how does this all tie into sort of those buckets we were talking about, cures, improving lives? Where does it fit into the JDRF strategy and what JDRF's trying to accomplish with the mission?
Right. It is a good question, Elizabeth. When we form a center together, we form it obviously around a strategic question in the area of cures or improving lives. And to remind you all, in cures, there is screening for risk, then there is immunological and beta cell biology to modify the course of the disease, and then cell replacement therapy, providing insulin independence. And improving lives is drugs, devices, behavioral interventions to provide you good glucose control, metabolic control, prevent complications, and also mental health. When we form a center together, it's to answer a central scientific question, and that may not cover our entire strategy, and that's natural. That's natural. You can't make a square peg fill us in a round hole. However, the University of Michigan is actually covering 3 of the major areas within our strategic project priority areas. One, unequivocally, is improving the lives and looking at a person at an individual level rather than a glucose level, because you're treating the mental burden, the glucose and metabolic burden, as well as preventing long-term complications. So almost the entire improving lives area, the today of type 1 diabetes, is being addressed at the U of M Center of Excellence. Additionally, because of the work Scott and Lonnie are doing, it's also fostering pathways to provide insulin independence by creating healthy beta cells or healthy environment for beta cells. And that actually collaborates not just within the U of M, but also with our broader cell replacement consortium, which I won't have time to get into today. So the U of M is covering three major areas of our focus at the moment. What it is not into, and that's perfectly fine, is screening for risk or early on in immunological and beta cell replication pathways there. So it's a strategically a very important investment for JDRF that can have true meaningful difference for people with diabetes.
Well, and the interdisciplinary aspects of it are what allows it to impact so many pieces of our strategy, which, I mean, again, it blows me away, the team that's been created here at the Center of Excellence at U of M. Just as we kind of wrap up, I have a couple more questions about the center, and then I want to ask people what's exciting in general about T1D research right now, but what's exciting about the Center of Excellence? What have you learned so far, halfway through, that is exciting you? And how soon do you kind of think it's going to, impact people's lives? So I'll ask each of you to answer that question. So if, Kara, you could, what's exciting so far about the Center of Excellence and what you've learned?
I think what's exciting to me so far is we actually just published a study that was looking at kind of the burden of mental health disorders in type 1 diabetes and finding that a lot of the burden is linked to the complications. And now the bigger question is what kind of comes first? Is it the complications or is it the, is it more the mental health disorders? And again, that interplay is really important. And having the opportunity to decipher that with, the Project 4, and then looking at the entire global picture of how does this impact an individual and not just, the number that we've been so focused on.
I love that.
Yeah.
The whole person.
Yeah.
Scott, what's exciting for you so far about the center?
I'll try to keep it short because I think I'm just so excited about a lot of things we're doing. But I think one thing that we've learned that's been quite interesting is that the cells that we make that make some insulin, we've been able to use data that we've generated and also data that we've collected. There's a ton of data on generating beta cells now that are out in kind of the ether of cyberspace. And what we found is that the cells that we're making right now, part of the reason we think they don't work so well is they actually look much more similar to what would be like a fetal human beta cell. And one of the really unique differences between fetal beta cells and an adult beta cell are these little things inside of cells called mitochondria. They're the power plant of the cell. Many of you who took biology in high school might remember that. They make energy. And what we've been able to identify is that these mitochondria are they're not programmed properly. They have these fetal characteristics. They haven't made it to maturation. And we're quite excited because now we have kind of, rather than this giant question of how to make these cells work better, now we're able to zero in and focus on specific targets. And it helps to make a gigantic problem a little bit more achievable.
That's super exciting. Tom, what do you think is exciting about this center so far? And how soon do you think this is going to actually make an impact on people's lives?
Right. Well, I would say the biggest thing that is fascinating is that this center grant project is one part of the Caswell Diabetes Institute, or just the Diabetes Institute, okay, under Dr. Meyer's direction. And we get a huge amount of support of all kinds being part of that. It's leveraging all the resources. So, and even through COVID, when when labs were shut down, clinics were chaotic, everybody has still been working very hard and making progress now, about 2.5 years into this. But on more detail, it's things like Dr. Fort's collection of human eyes. Now that may sound a little bit grotesque, but he's uncovering new understanding of how diabetes affects the eye that nobody has ever had before. And our colleagues who are kidney specialists are doing the same. Dr. Kretzler and Dr. Penether. We're also looking at brains and nerves with other colleagues. So it's really remarkable to get all this put together. So when is it going to help? Well, I think that this isn't going to be clinical practice soon, but I think in a couple years we could have this into more advanced clinical research. So it's like building a business. You start at a certain level, then you have to verify it, make sure it's working, and then spread it out across multiple sites. But we're getting there, and fortunately we know that JDRF is in this for the long haul, and we're hoping to get the NIH involved more in this. And so it's going to get there, that hopefully we can have a metabotype that everybody has that is theirs, and we treat them as an individual with the whole big picture.
That day will be a very exciting day indeed, for sure.
We'll meet in the big house.
So I'll just say, I think almost all of us have been seeing advances in T1D published in the news. Good Morning America was featured some recent advances. So I'm going to end with this question to all of our panelists, because most of them are clinicians. Many of them have personal connections to T1D that drive their research and clinical care or their investment in research. What's exciting right now? What have you heard that just makes you feel like we're on the precipice of really major things for people living with T1D? So, Kara?
I don't think that there's one individual thing that I'm the most excited about, but I think what excites me the most is this paradigm switch from looking at glucose as the end-all be-all outcome for type 1 diabetes and to really incorporating that into more like, what does the quality of life look like for people who are living with this disease right now? And I think that having that a brighter spotlight there allows more research to be done, allows more interventions to be done, and I think that personally for me is the excitement that I feel when I open up diabetes care.
That's awesome, because people will do better when we look at the whole person. Mm-hmm. Scott?
All right, I want to echo Kara's point that there's a lot of things to be excited about. I think one thing I'm particularly excited about is this idea that, we think type 1 diabetes is one singular process. And now the evidence says no, and Sanjoy brought that up. It's not just a disease of your immune system. That's what we were taught in school. That's what many people believe. We know now that there are at least 4 organ systems that don't work that probably cause your type 1. Your immune system, definitely. Your beta cells themselves participate in the disease and probably cause their own destruction. We know that the rest of the pancreas, the parts that don't make insulin, that make digestive enzymes, those also seem to be abnormal and contribute to the disease. And these bacteria in our gut, we sometimes call the microbiome, we're finding those are also abnormal in people who develop type 1 diabetes. So we have now broadened our horizons. I mentioned to you, I want to know why we get type 1 so we can fix it or prevent it. So having a narrow view prevents you from seeing the big picture. We're starting to see that big picture, which I think is going to open up many opportunities to think about therapies for type 1 diabetes. And I think as a clinician and a patient, I tell all my patients, I'm not going to promise you a cure, but I want you to hang on and do as well as possible when that cure is ready. And I think the things that Tom mentioned and Kara are mentioning are the day-to-day lives of better pump therapies, preventing complications, treating the whole person. That's going to make it so that when the therapy is ready, you're healthy enough to receive it.
That's definitely the hope that I carry home to my family members. Tom, what's exciting for you right now?
Listening to my colleagues. They've said it all, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
That's awesome. So, Sanjoy, I know asking you what's exciting right now is like asking you to pick your favorite children, although I happen to know you only have one, but I have 3.
I have many, probably vary every morning, right?
Yeah. So what's exciting for you right now?
So beyond the scientific advances and everything else mentioned today and brought up today's recognition of type 1 diabetes as being a crisis, as being on the increase. It's not good news, but at least a recognition of it by non-JDRF people. I mean, JDRF, we're in a family of like-minded people, of course, but even outside, the federal agencies recognizing it making it to the news. And now on an international level, type 1 diabetes has been recognized as one of the very few autoimmune diseases, very few, 2 to 4, that do not have anything beyond insulin. That recognition of the gap, I think, is going to go a long way in removing the shame around type 1 diabetes, in promoting research there, financial resources as well, non-financial resources, identifying pathways to move the needle here and ultimately impact people's lives. So I think the recognition of type 1 diabetes is a major problem affecting millions around the world, is heretofore, to me, a very, although kind of bleak, is to me, gives me hope that there will be a better future ahead of us.
And I'm going to answer this question myself, too, because I have the privilege of working on the JDRF International Research Committee, talking to Sanjoy and his team, talking to scientists from all over the world. And I think what's really exciting to me right now is the understanding that, there are stages of development of T1D prior to onset of clinical symptoms, and that research is taking place and clinical trials are taking place at every stage along that continuum for all people of all ages with T1D. So, we're trying to intervene prior to somebody even being diagnosed, and we're really hoping right now that this drug that's at the FDA will be approved super soon to be given to people who are pre-symptomatic, before they have onset of clinical diagnosis of T1D, and that will delay their disease for 3 years. Because when I think, okay, we can delay it for 3 years, what if we can delay it for 5? Or what if a combination of different drugs in that space could delay it for 10? And then what if it's never, that no one ever gets a diagnosis of T1D again? So I want to thank you all for being here. It is truly one of the best communities I never wanted to join. And it is truly not possible for all of this amazing research and all of these incredible advances to happen without your help and support. So thank you so much. And if you would like, we can do some Q&A.
Thank you.
So April has a microphone that she can bring to you so that I don't have to repeat for the whole room. But if anybody has any burning questions, our experts would love to answer them.
Thank you for the presentation. It was terrific. It was just announced a couple of days ago that a company called Insulet had received FDA clearance for a new kind of artificial pancreas that they call tubeless. What is that? Is it really a breakthrough, or is it just kind of more of the same?
Sanjay?
Yep, absolutely. So Insulet, the company, got approval for an artificial pancreas system called Omnipod, called Horizon 5. That's basically the third artificial pancreas system approved by the FDA here. The prior two were approved in 2016 and 2018, made by other companies. So this is a breakthrough in the sense that it provides automatic glucose control by automated insulin delivery, and the only human intervention required is during meals or during exercise or during what we call a disturbance. So it is going to benefit a lot of people, but it's not a first of its kind. Why it is being made a lot in the news is two primary reasons. There are many reasons. One is, this is the first one that got approval right away for pediatric and for adult population right out the gate. And it's also a tubeless pump. There are many people, we want people to have choice. One of the JDRF's roles we didn't get to discuss today is we don't want the insurance companies to dictate what you should be on, what therapy works for you. We want you to choose. So this provides a choice to a person that prefers a tubeless pump over a pump with a tube. And so they have now the option of going into an artificial pancreas system with the tubeless pump, which they did not have up until this approval.
I'll also add, for anybody who is connected to an automated insulin delivery device or an artificial pancreas, I think that most of the people I know who are using these integrated systems with a CGM and a pump and an algorithm that talks between them are finding a decrease in their daily burden. They're thinking about T1D less. I think, Kara, you might know, there's been studies that have been done that talk about the number of times people think about their T1D in a day. And it's in the hundreds. And people who are on these systems that automate processes, I think it's cut by half or maybe even more.
More than
yeah,
that.
in just also better outcomes. Like Scott was saying, the better outcomes so that you can just live your best life today. I mean, all of my family members have experienced a decrease in A1C, even the one who's in puberty right now, and his blood sugars are wackadoo. So, I mean, even his A1C has dropped. So, really exciting. Other questions?
Well, I'll add too, maybe Paul's going to talk about it. I think that we shouldn't downplay things that might seem incremental, because being able to go from 2 weeks to 3 weeks on a device is really big.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul?
One of the thoughts I had as I was watching and listening today is like I'm watching the players on the field. You're the players on the field, and we're kind of the spectators, right, at this point. So, by the way, the game's been very good. I really enjoyed it. So, other than cheering you on, which is relatively easy to do, what specific things do you need in terms of what you want to accomplish? What are the specific things that you want from us and that you need from us?
Well, I'm going to answer one piece of that. And that is participation in clinical trials is really important. JDRF and participation in screening. And I'll mention that for 2 reasons, and then I'll let Sanjoy answer also. In order to intervene, we need to know who's at risk for T1D. So if we aren't screening, then we're not going to have a big enough pool of people who are at risk for T1D. TrialNet, which many of you are familiar with, is a fantastic screening program, but it only captures about 10% of people who are at risk for T1D, because about 85 to 90% of people with T1D diagnosis have no T1D in their family, and TrialNet's only a familial screening program. So I'm going to put a pitch in for our T1 Detect screening program through JDRF, because we need people to participate in clinical trials. And then that's the other thing. I mean, we just have to have people who want to commit to advancing science, participate in these trials so we can get answers to questions. And of course, they're very safe. I mean, they're very highly regulated, so it's not like, willy-nilly. So, I mean, I think a lot of people feel a lot of reward for participating in those too. Sanjoy?
I mean, you covered 2 of the very important points. As volunteers, as family members, as here, continue to do what you do. The couple of areas I'll say, one is raising awareness, education, because there still is a very big gap in knowledge, even in the lay communities, certainly also in the clinical community. No insult to anyone, but even between HCPs, there's a huge knowledge gap there. So to the extent you can, feel free to go and talk about it. So education, raising awareness about the problem of type 1 diabetes, how many people are getting it, and you can do your share in it. The second is, and I always say this whenever I go out and speak, is that JDRF has been so successful because of its people, the grassroots advocacy. We have been so successful for 52 years because of the families, because of everyone, not only through their individual contributions, but also calling their local senator, congressman, banging on doors, knocking on tables and doing whatever they can. There's a huge role you can play in advocacy. Huge role in advocacy, and you can do your share. And please continue to do that, because that's what we rely on. That's what we are known for. That is our power. That is our power. And that's what fuels the research funding. So that comes actually before the research funding here. So there's things you can do, but certainly what Elizabeth said is very important in terms of knowing your risk and letting your family and your friends know about it and participate in clinical trial. That is the best donation you can give to JDRF.
I'll interrupt there.
No, I was going to say, not that we don't want your donations, and we have upcoming events that I know there's been emails and materials and no, I mean, those events and the raising of the money, I mean, obviously is crucial. I mean, we are on the precipice of so many major advances, and we've got to have money to fuel the research. I mean, bottom line.
I think I'm not getting invited again.
Can I just jump in and just say, I love the analogy, but I would actually say that you are a player too. Yeah. Right? There aren't spectators and players. Like, the only way this happens, because I was a kid that went to walks for the JDRF, right? Now I'm here doing the research, right? I always felt like I was part of it. I think the only way this works is if we're all invested in it together. So I think actually you're just as big of a player as any of us. You might want to come up on stage, but we only do this together, and it's those things that Sanjoy and Elizabeth pointed out: awareness, advocacy, commitment, participation. You know, we all can contribute in our own way.
And I know you'll see Tom, Scott, Kara at events, at the walk, at the galas. I mean, we're all in here. So, and we hope you are too. I saw another hand, a couple other hands, and Lisa's over here.
So my daughter's a type 1, and that's why I'm here. And so you want to research me, I should come and participate in your trials? Am I the kind of person that you want to talk to and you need information from?
If I heard your question completely, it was a little bit fading away. If your daughter has type 1 diabetes, then for you and the rest of the family members to get screened for the risk of type 1 is the first step one can take, because although 85 to 90% of people that are newly diagnosed, as Elizabeth just pointed out, do not have a known family member, but if you already have type 1 in the family, the risk to another immediate family member, unfortunately, is 15-fold higher. It's 15-fold higher. So for you to get screened for that is important. And then there are clinical trial eligibility criteria. And then if you or others meet the eligibility criteria, and if you're willing and able to, then you can participate in those clinical trials. But that would be the first step, is to get screened for the risk.
And I'd point out that T1D is not a disease of children only. I won't ask for a show of hands, but there are many people who are diagnosed with T1D as adults. I mean, children are a face of the disease in a lot of ways, because we all know why children are a face of this disease, but 80% of people living with T1D are adults. So, screening as an adult is still very valuable.
So I was diagnosed in 1963. So I have had diabetes for 59 years. And I am healthy, and I am happy. But I want to say, sadly, I'm very happy that a lot of people are being diagnosed with diabetes, because that's why all your research is happening. That's why we've got all the money. When I was diagnosed, nobody heard of diabetes. It was a strange thing, and nobody knew what to do with me. And I knew that nobody else was going to help me but me. So I went through my life just living my life. I did become a dietitian because I thought I could learn more about food. I spent my career in mental health because I knew that diabetes can cause problems. So I'm really, really happy that so much research is going on. And I've been through JDRF for many, many years. I went to Joslin Clinic when I was first diagnosed. I have been asking to be part of a research program for years. And everyone that responds says, you've had it too long. You're too old. So, are there any research things going on at U of M? My doctors are out of St. Joe's, so I don't know any of you. But I would love to be part of some sort of research, because I am healthy.
I can start. Sorry, Kara.
No.
So, Jocelyn, where you were first diagnosed, or we went to after the diagnosis, started a program that JDRF funded many years ago. You know, the medalist program, right?
I am part of it.
Oh, so you are a medalist. So there we go. There we go again. So
you're actually
you are a part of a study, and very quickly, and Martin will know this all too well, the medalist program was started as actually as a celebration. And this shows how far we have come, because in those days, if you have lived with type 1 diabetes and 50 years or older, you were given a medal.
Yeah, I've got it.
This was the life expectancy many, many decades ago. And we've certainly come a long way, although we are still looking for a cure here. But the point is, And that what was started as a celebratory program eventually became a very robust research program. Because what we found is lots of research unpacking in 2 minutes here. We found is many of the medalists, despite 50, 60, 70, 80 years of type 1 diabetes, I think the oldest is 91 now, or 93, some of them do not have any complications.
That's right.
So either they were gifted with a good pair of genes, I don't know, or they did something right, like you, something right throughout their life, and then some do have complications. And trying to study this has opened so many doors, including area of what we would not have fathomed at the time as beta cell biology, that some of them still have some level of insulin production left.
I was part of that study.
Exactly, and so whether that insulin
But that was
production,
9 years ago now,
Right.
and I live in Michigan, so I don't get back to Joslin Clinic.
there are 50 plus centers for medalists around the country. I will be able to connect you with that. Absolutely connect you. I don't know if you have them. I'll leave it to my panelists here to speak about it, but there are 50 plus centers around the country, so people no longer have to fly to Joslin to do it, and that's from about 10 years ago. And we are now finding new therapies using the data from medalists, especially for eye disease that is being worked on, but also for kidney and other diseases. So I'll let Tom or others weigh in here about other research opportunities at U of M.
I actually don't know about, do we have any trials?
We have several clinical trials, and I'm happy to connect you with more specific type 1 diabetes, but I think that's a great question is, how do I interface with this big academic center and what's going on, and I want to be a part of it? It's a tough thing to do when you're not necessarily a patient here. I absolutely agree with that. There is a website specific for all of the clinical trials going on at University of Michigan called umhealthresearch.org. And it doesn't have every single clinical trial, but it has most of them. And you type in type 1 diabetes, and it'll link you to all the clinical trials that are enrolling right there. And you can look at, it's not just clinical trials of medications, but also exercise, lifestyle interventions. So everything that's going on at U of M for any particular condition, you can be a part of if you want to. And it'll give you contact information on how to enroll in that study or express your interest in that study.
And Sanjoy also wants to mention JDRF has a similar tool.
A similar tool, it's called Clinical Trials Connection. Okay, sorry, but there is a contact information there. If you want further details, we'll provide it to you. But thank you for raising that question here. It gives us food for thought to go back and, as Kara was saying, areas of where we can improve and enhance in our communication around it.
We have another question? Thanks, Lisa.
Yes, my teenager who's on a pump is quite intrigued by the inhaled insulin, not the Baqsimi, but the
Afrezza.
inhaler, the fast-acting insulin, and I was curious about the promise of that.
Yeah, we funded one of the first research on that one. I am being bold with clinicians on the stage here speaking to it, but yes, Afrezza, you're speaking about the inhaled insulin, which is a mealtime insulin. And what's amazing about it, it acts very fast. It's the fastest insulin we have beyond your own pancreas producing insulin. It works within 8 minutes. You can take it during a meal or even after a meal. And it comes in 3 fixed doses of inhalation. And so many people are using it for their mealtime control. But if you take inhaled insulin, you still have to be on a long-acting insulin. Or you could even combine that with a closed-loop system, but instead of bolusing in your pump, you could use the Afrezza for your mealtime coverage.
Scott
but I
and
would like to
Kara?
see if Scott and others would.
Are you
Yeah,
using that in your practices?
I mean, we have them available. I think, it's always a patient preference thing. So I would say that it's been hard because of the previous predecessor to the inhaled insulin that didn't have great outcomes and then was taken off the market. We've had to try to rebuild trust with patients that want to use it. But we do have patients that come to us that are very interested in using it. And then, we go through the pros and cons. I think the pro is the ease, that rapidity of the onset. one of the cons is like there are fixed doses, and if you're someone that like eats really small meals or is very sensitive to insulin, sometimes it's like too much for you. But you know, some of these are patient-specific nuances, but I think Sanjoy's point earlier about having many options, this is one, and it's nice for folks that want it.
Kara, is it available for people under 18, or is it adult label only?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I apologize. I only see adults in my patient population.
It's not, the phase 3 studies just started in under 18, in pediatric populations. It's approved only 18 and above at the moment.
But Will's getting there.
I think
Yeah.
I'll add though, one limitation that I've had in using Afrezza is that coverage sometimes isn't the greatest for it. Unfortunately, right?
I mean insurance coverage.
Insurance coverage often isn't the greatest, so sometimes it can be fairly expensive.
And that is one opportunity that people may want to take to look at the JDRF toolkits for working with insurance companies, because a lot of times if you can work with your physician, you can gather materials that you can make a case with your insurance company. It can be work to do that, but you can sometimes get your insurance company on board. And JDRF has a really nice spot on its website where they give you some tools for how to work those systems.
Or you can lobby for it. To going back to Paul's point.
Well, thank you so much. I don't think we have any other questions. We are, again, so grateful to you for being here. If you want to extend Paul's analogy, we're glad you were spectators here, but I liked Scott's twist on it.
Yeah.
We're all players in this game. All of you can make a difference, and we are really grateful to you all for being here and for being a part of our community. So thank you so much.
But we'll be here for a little bit,
Yeah,
so.
I'm going to take the mic off,
Yeah.
though.
Thank you.